echoes of regret, seeds of a story. The glare of the studio lights seemed to carve new lines onto Julian Vance's face. He was the picture of success, CEO of Vance Industries, sharp suit, sharper mind, a man whose pronouncements moved markets. Yet, facing the unblinking eye of the nation's top financial news anchor, a different Julian emerged. Regrets? The anchor prompted, sensing a crack in the polished veneer. Julian Vance, a titan usually composed, hesitated. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, a rare crack in the facade. A flicker of something raw crossed his features before being smoothed away. Almost. Regret, he echoed, his voice a low hum that commanded silence. Yes. One significant one. He paused, leaning slightly forward, his gaze distant, fixed on something only he could see, perhaps a crowded high school hallway from long ago. In high school, I was blind. Utterly blind. I held a diamond in my hand and mistook it for common stone. Let it slip through my fingers. Another pause, heavier this time, thick with unspoken self-recrimination. Someone else saw its worth. But, and here, a ghost of determination returned to his eyes, a possessive spark igniting. Luckily for me, she remains unattached. There might still be a chance. A chance to undo the carelessness, the cruelty, a chance he clearly felt entitled to explore. A confession like that, broadcast live, sent ripples through the financial world and beyond. Analysts scrambled. Gossip columnists buzzed. Hearts across the nation might have fluttered at the vulnerability of such a powerful man finally admitting fault. But not hers. Miles away, in the hushed elegance of a private dining room overlooking the city skyline, Eliza Reyes felt a faint tremor run through her, an echo of an old, buried ache. The clip of Julian's interview played softly on a tablet nearby, brought to her attention by an associate. She registered the words, the calculated vulnerability, the possessive undertone in his claim of a chance. Her expression remained serene, sculpted by years of quiet resilience, yet a shadow flickered deep within her dark eyes. The common stone. He still saw it that way, didn't he? A thing he'd dropped, now possibly valuable again because someone else noticed. Not because of her inherent worth. The old sting, sharp and sudden, pierced through the calm she'd so carefully cultivated over the years. The diamond he'd carelessly discarded. He had no idea of the pressure it took to become what she was now. Beside her, Damian Thorne observed her reaction. He missed nothing. His presence was a paradox, utterly relaxed yet radiating an intensity that kept the world at arm's length. He hadn't glanced at the tablet, didn't need to. He'd read the shift in the air around Eliza, subtle as it was, like sensing a change in barometric pressure before a storm. He gently pushed a plate of meticulously prepared scallops towards her, a silent offering of comfort, his gaze never leaving her face, a silent question in his eyes. When the clip finished, Eliza merely offered a small, enigmatic smile and reached for her water glass. No words were needed between them, their understanding ran deeper than that. Damian's phone vibrated discreetly on the table. He picked it up, his eyes still on Eliza for a moment before glancing at the screen. It was a brief message from his own network, alerting him to the Vance interview snippet causing waves online. He saw the name, Julian Vance. He saw the context, regret, high school, a lost gem. A muscle feathered almost imperceptibly in Damian's jaw as he read the alert. He connected it instantly to the faint shadow he'd seen in Eliza's eyes. Julian Vance. Pining publicly for what he'd thrown away. For Eliza. The dismissive possessiveness in the man's tone was intolerable. Without looking away from her, Damian tapped out a reply. Short. Brutal. An order directed squarely at the foundations of Vance Industries. Initiate Phase 1. Full capital withdrawal. All subsidiaries. Now. He placed the phone face down. Power, absolute and silent, deployed without fanfare. A protective shield tightening around the woman beside him. When love, or something fiercely protective that resembled it, came intertwined with such immense power and unwavering loyalty, what value did a decade-late confession truly hold? What weight did Julian Vance's regret carry against the quiet, lethal efficiency of Damian Thorne? 0. The intrigue hung heavy in the air, thick with unspoken history. Julian's public pining, Eliza's quiet composure, Damian's immediate, ruthless response, it all pointed back. Back to a time before the empires and the accolades. Back to the crucible of adolescence, to fluorescent lit hallways and the casual cruelty that could shape a life. Back to a specific, searing incident involving a sham election, a moment designed to break the spirit of a girl already burdened by insecurities. That mock election, a piece of casual high school barbarism disguised as a joke. The kind that leaves scars invisible to everyone but the one who bears them. Julian Vance remembered a common stone. He seemed to have forgotten the hammer he himself wielded back then. He spoke of chances now, oblivious to the fortress that had been built around the gem he once shattered. A fortress named Damian Thorne. What exactly happened in those formative years at Northwood High? What specific act of blindness led to Julian's profound, televised regret? How does one go from being the target of such petty tyranny to being shielded by a force like Damian Thorne? And how did Eliza Reyes navigate the aftermath of such casual brutality to arrive here, flanked by a man who could casually cripple empires on her behalf? The answers weren't simple, they were tangled in the messy, painful, and surprisingly resilient threads of the past. To understand the weight of that regret, and the true value of the diamond he let slip away, we must journey back to the halls of Northwood High, to witness the moment the first cracks appeared. The cruelty of youth, the spark of defiance. To truly grasp the weight of Julian Vance's regret, the cruelty Eliza Reyes endured, and the unexpected arrival of a figure like Damian Thorne, we must return to the unforgiving social landscape of Northwood High, to witness the moment the first cracks appeared. Northwood High wasn't just a school, it was a microcosm of the city's rigid social strata. Gleaming European cars deposited students whose surnames adorned the city's most prestigious institutions, while others, like Eliza Reyes, arrived via crowded city buses, carrying the weight of worlds far removed from casual luxury. Eliza moved through these hallways like a ghost, head off and down, not out of shame, but necessity. She was perpetually navigating, trying to remain unseen, unheard. Her school uniform, always clean but slightly worn, didn't blend with the effortless designer casuals surrounding her. Her face, prone to breakouts that bloomed under stress, was framed by dark, unruly hair she constantly tried to tame. Yet, behind the thick lenses of her glasses, her eyes held a sharp, assessing intelligence. She saw everything, catalogued the shifting alliances, the petty cruelties, the blinding privilege. She was invisible, largely by choice, finding refuge in library corners and the worn pages of borrowed books. And then there was Julian Vance. Even then, he possessed a golden aura. Handsome, athletic, heir apparent to the Vance Industries' fortune, though the family was weathering a temporary, discreet financial storm that had forced them from their mansion into a rented property in Eliza's much humbler neighborhood. He moved through Northwood with an easy confidence that attracted followers like moths to a flame. For 6 years, since middle school, Eliza had harbored a secret, hopeless crush on him. It wasn't just his looks, it was the occasional, unexpected kindness she'd glimpsed, a word defending someone weaker, a shared smile over a ridiculous teacher antic, moments that felt like sunshine breaking through clouds. These moments built a fantasy in her quiet heart, a belief that beneath the golden exterior, there was genuine warmth. Her mother working as a maid for his family, a fact Julian usually helped her keep quiet out of some sense of obligation or politeness, only added a layer of complicated proximity to her silent adoration. The confession wasn't planned. It spilled out one damp evening under the sickly orange glow of a street lamp near the corner where Eliza sometimes helped her family watch their small fruit stall. Julian was passing by, shoulders slumped, looking uncharacteristically burdened by his family's recent troubles. Eliza, emboldened by a surge of empathy that momentarily overcame her usual reserve, called out his name. She pressed a small bag of crisp apples and pears into his hands. "My mom bought extra," she mumbled, her cheeks flushing. He looked down at the fruit, then at her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. His long lashes cast shadows on his cheekbones. Then, a flicker of something, annoyance? Embarrassment? Crossed his face. "I don't need your pity, Eliza." He dropped the bag as if it burned him, the fruit scattering across the damp pavement like fallen stars. The rejection, the casual dismissal, stung sharper than she'd expected. Her carefully constructed composure crumbled. Apples rolled into the gutter. Her self-esteem felt just as bruised, just as discarded. But something else rose in its place, a desperate need to clarify, to make him understand it wasn't pity. Julian, The words caught in her throat. Then, tumbling out in a rush, I don't pity you. I like you. That's why I try to be nice. Silence stretched, thick and awkward. She tried to recover, forcing a light tone. Look, your desk drawer is overflowing with snacks from other girls, right? Milk cakes, cookies. What's one more bag of fruit? No big deal. He stared at her for what felt like an eternity, maybe 3 seconds, maybe 30. Finally, he spoke, his voice devoid of warmth. I appreciate the thought, Eliza. But I don't like you that way. He turned and walked away, leaving her standing amidst the scattered fruit, the echo of his polite, devastating refusal hanging in the air. It was, in a way, what she'd expected. Of course he didn't like her. Why would he? She stooped, gathering the fallen apples, wiping the grit from their skins with trembling fingers, the cold reality settling in her chest. That rejection, however, was merely the prelude. The true betrayal came a day later, during the stifling quiet of afternoon self-study. A folded piece of notebook paper began its insidious journey among the boys in the back rows. Snickers erupted, quickly stifled. Whispers followed its path. Eliza, initially lost in her chemistry textbook, felt the familiar prickle of anxiety. She knew that particular brand of malicious energy. The paper eventually landed on the desk beside Julian's. He glanced at it, a faint smirk playing on his lips as he read the first part. Then, the paper was passed forward, eventually reaching Eliza's row. When it landed on the desk of the boy next to her, the classroom fell unnervingly silent. He unfolded it slowly, revealing 2 crudely drawn columns. The first, titled Northwood Beauty Queen, was filled with votes for the school's most popular, conventionally pretty girls. The second column, her breath hitched. Northwood's Ugly Queen. Below it, name after name was scrawled. And then she saw it. Near the bottom, unmistakable in its sharp, confident slant, Julian Vance's handwriting, voting for her. 17 votes out of 21 boys. 17 endorsements of her inadequacy. And his name among them. Just 24 hours after she'd laid her foolish heart bare. The boy who held the sun in her private universe had just helped cast her into the deepest shadow. The shame was a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. She knew she wasn't beautiful by Northwood standards, the monolith eyes, the 2 full lips, the stubborn acne, the slightly darker skin that wasn't fashionably tanned. She knew. But to have it weaponized like this, by him, it was a different kind of pain. A raw, eviscerating agony. The room seemed to tilt, the silence pressing in, thick with anticipation. Everyone was watching, waiting for her to crumble, to cry, to fulfill their expectations of the designated ugly duckling. Her pen felt heavy in her hand. She spun it once, twice, the cheap plastic cool against her skin. Then, taking a deep, ragged breath that did little to calm the frantic beating of her heart, Eliza leaned over the notebook. With a hand that miraculously didn't shake, she wrote her own name firmly in the Ugly Queen column. Eliza Reyes. Then, she did something she'd never done before. She stood up. Holding the offending notebook high, turning slowly so everyone could see her addition, she met their stunned gazes. Her voice, though quiet, carried through the silent room. Looks like I agree with the majority. She held their eyes for a beat longer, a silent challenge. If you want to ridicule me, fine. But I won't give you the satisfaction of breaking me. Then she sat down, opened her textbook, and forced herself to read, though the words swam meaninglessly before her tear-blurred eyes. That night, the predictable happened. A gaggle of boys, shamefaced and awkward, approached her after school. Hey, Eliza, about that list, we were just messing around, you know? One mumbled. Yeah, total joke, another added quickly. Besides, if you didn't have the acne, you'd actually be kinda cute, offered a third, as if this were some great consolation. Eliza managed a tight smile. It's fine, she said, her voice coolly polite. Honestly, I don't really care what you guys think. And the surprising thing was, looking at their averted eyes and forced apologies, she realized it was true. Their opinions were meaningless. As for Julian, she pushed the thought of him away. He was less than meaningless now. A void. But she couldn't let it go entirely. Not yet. She waited for him near the entrance to the narrow, dimly lit alley that led towards both their temporary homes. When he appeared, silhouetted against the fading light, she stepped out. Julian. He stopped, surprised. Eliza? What is it? I borrowed a book from your family's study once, she said, her voice steady despite the tremor she felt inside. Jane Eyre. There's a line I wanted to return to you. She looked him straight in the eye, dredging up the quote that had resonated so deeply in the library's dusty quiet. Do you think, because I am poor, obscure, plain, and little, I am soulless and heartless? Her voice gained strength. You think wrong. I have as much soul as you, and full as much heart. She paused, letting the words hang in the charged air between them. Obviously, in your eyes, Julian, people who aren't beautiful don't really exist. Or if we do, we certainly don't have the right to feel pain, or joy, or anything at all. You and your friends, you aren't cartoon villains. You cry over charity appeals online, get angry about injustices in the news. But you can casually, thoughtlessly bully your own classmate for a cheap laugh during study hall. Her voice trembled slightly now, fueled by righteous anger. You thought it was funny. Harmless. Did it ever occur to you, even for a second, that it might actually hurt someone? She took another breath. I used to think you were different, Julian. Better than the others. Turns out, you're exactly the same. Her gaze was unwavering. So, consider this me formally retracting my confession from yesterday. The person I thought you were, the moonlight, the mountain snow, he doesn't exist. You're just ordinary. And whether you think I'm ugly or not, an ordinary, cruel person like that, he isn't worth my time. He isn't worth anyone's liking. For a fleeting moment, something flickered in his usually cool eyes. Surprise? Guilt? She couldn't be sure. And frankly, she didn't care to decipher it anymore. Without waiting for a response, Eliza turned and walked away down the alley, leaving Julian Vance standing alone under the encroaching darkness. Not long after, seeking refuge from Julian's proximity and the pitying or curious glances that followed the voting incident, Eliza requested a seat change. Fate, or perhaps a weary teacher's sense of irony, placed her next to the one person who seemed utterly indifferent to Northwood's rigid social games, Damian Thorne. Damian was Northwood's resident enigma. Heir to the Thorne Consortium, a name whispered with awe and a little fear even among the elite, he treated school rules as vague suggestions. He skipped classes with impunity, radiated a dangerous boredom, and possessed an intellect that kept him effortlessly at the top of the academic rankings despite his apparent lack of effort. He was the only boy who hadn't participated in the vote, not out of any discernible moral stance, Eliza assumed, but likely because he hadn't been present or simply couldn't be bothered. He was also the one person Julian Vance seemed to consciously avoid. Eliza knew the rumors surrounding Damian, wild parties, fast motorbikes, a disdain for authority. Her first encounter outside school had confirmed the playful recklessness. He and his equally privileged friends had accidentally soaked her with water guns during a music festival, after which he'd insisted on drying her clothes by driving her around the ring road at terrifying speeds on his sleek, black motorbike. He was chaos personified, existing in a stratosphere so far removed from her own reality it felt like another planet. Sitting next to him was unsettling. The first day, he'd been asleep on the desk when she arrived, head pillowed on his arms. He woke when the bell rang, blinked lazily at her, and drawled in a low, slightly hoarse voice, "Giving up on Golden Boy Vance already, Reyes?" Eliza bristled. "I was never chasing him." He gave a soft, humorless snort. Could have fooled me. He knew. Somehow, this infuriatingly perceptive boy knew about her stupid, secret crush. He must have been the one who'd found her lost sketchbook weeks ago, the one filled not with landscapes or still lives, but with page after page of surprisingly detailed drawings of Julian Vance. Damian had returned it with a single, cutting remark. Seriously? Him? You've got terrible taste. He clearly didn't like Julian, which only added another layer of complexity to sharing a desk with him. Their interactions were sparse and unpredictable. Sometimes he'd ignore her completely. Other times, he'd engage in petty, baffling acts of annoyance, subtly playing with the ends of her hair during lectures, doodling her name with mocking flourishes on scrap paper, blocking her path in the hallway. Then came Valentine's Day. Julian's desk, predictably, was buried under an avalanche of pink and red offerings. Damian sauntered in late, looking bored, then casually produced a ridiculously expensive-looking box of imported Swiss chocolates. He dropped it onto Eliza's desk. Nobody at home eats this stuff. Take it. Eliza, wary and confused, pushed it back. No thanks, Thorne. I'm cutting back on sugar. His eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. Then, with sudden violence, he kicked his chair back, snatched the chocolates, strode to the bin, and threw the entire box away with a clang. He stalked out of the classroom without a backward glance, not even bothering to stay for the first period. Moments later, Julian Vance approached her desk, a look of pained earnestness on his face. He placed a small, elegantly wrapped box before her. This one's sugar-free, Eliza, he said softly, his eyes pleading for, what? Forgiveness? Understanding? She didn't know. All she knew was that his gesture felt suffocatingly performative. Later, a classmate, maybe Chow Map, maybe someone else, slid a note onto her desk. OMG, Reyes. First the tyrant, then the male god? When did you become such a player? Eliza crumpled the note. Player? Hardly. She wasn't naive enough to believe either boy harbored genuine romantic feelings. Damian Thorne operated on whim and boredom, his actions were inexplicable, possibly even cruel in their carelessness. Julian Vance, she suspected, was acting out of guilt, likely prompted by his mother who, Eliza knew, had a soft spot for her and had probably urged Julian to be kinder. They were from different worlds, driven by different, equally unfathomable motives. Neither saw her. Not really. But Damian, he had defended her. The memory of that night surfaced unexpectedly. After the vote, after the pathetic apologies, Damian had somehow gotten hold of the crumpled voting list. Eliza hadn't seen it happen, but she'd heard the commotion. He'd stormed back into the now emptying classroom, grabbed the list, his face a mask of cold fury. He'd torn it to shreds, throwing the pieces at the remaining boys. His voice, usually low and drawling, had dripped with contempt. Seriously? This is what passes for entertainment among Northwood's finest? Judging people? You pathetic excuses have zero taste, zero class. Criticizing her? He jabbed a finger towards where Eliza had been sitting. Let me tell you something. She's not the ugly one here. You are. Studying with you morons is the biggest humiliation of my life. He'd swept out, leaving stunned silence in his wake. To Eliza, hiding in the stairwell, listening with a pounding heart, he'd seemed like some kind of avenging angel, a dark, improbable hero she never expected. He teased her, annoyed her, confused her utterly. But he hadn't participated in the cruelty. And he had, in his own volatile way, stood up for her when no one else would. Especially not Julian. The thought brought a fresh wave of bitterness. Julian's image, the golden boy, the object of her long-held affection, continued to tarnish, replaced by the cold indifference he'd shown, the casual betrayal. And beside her now sat Damian Thorne, an unpredictable force of nature, the only person who had offered any kind of defense, however confusing. Her world was tilting, drawn towards an orbit she never expected, caught between a fallen idol's confusing signals and a dark star's baffling attention. Shadows from her past and the vast gulf between their lives threatened to pull everything apart before it even began. 7 years of silence, separate ascents. High school was a crucible, forging resilience in Eliza Reyes but leaving deep scars. As graduation approached, the fragile, confusing connection with Damian Thorne faced its own trials, while the world outside promised new paths and demanded difficult choices, pulling them inexorably towards a collision course neither anticipated. The first tremor arrived not as a whisper, but as a full-blown earthquake shaking the foundations of the Vance family. Vance Industries, long a symbol of established wealth, found itself entangled in a messy, high-profile investigation. Whispers of mismanagement, of risky ventures gone sour, of funds diverted through shadowy shell corporations, solidified into harsh reality splashed across financial news headlines. Creditors circled like sharks sensing blood in the water. The temporary financial storm Julian's family had been weathering became a Category 5 hurricane, threatening to capsize everything. Suddenly, the Vances weren't just living near Eliza's working-class neighborhood, they were facing the terrifying prospect of losing even that rented foothold, their assets frozen, their reputation in tatters. Panic set in, raw and undignified. Julian's father, Arthur Vance, a man usually defined by bespoke suits and booming confidence, appeared one evening at the Reyes' cramped apartment, his expensive overcoat looking incongruous against the worn linoleum. His face was gray, etched with sleeplessness and desperation. He bypassed Eliza's parents, who hovered nervously in the doorway, his focus zeroing in on Eliza with unnerving intensity. He stammered, his usual authoritative tone replaced by a frantic rasp, pride warring visibly with his fear. "Eliza, my dear girl. I know we haven't always seen eye to eye." He swallowed hard, the sound loud in the small room. "Julian tells me you're acquainted, friendly, perhaps, with young Damian Thorne?" Eliza stiffened, her stomach twisting. Friendly? It felt like a ridiculously inadequate, almost insulting word for the bewildering, charged tangle of interactions she'd had with Damian. More like navigating a minefield blindfolded. Mr. Vance leaned forward, ignoring the wary look on Mrs. Reyes' face, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, pleading whisper that made Eliza's skin crawl. "The Thornes? Eliza, you understand, they operate on a different level. They have influence. Unimaginable influence. Just a word from Damian, a quiet suggestion in the right ear, it could make all the difference. Could stop the bleeding at Vance Industries, give us breathing room." He wrung his hands, his composure shredding. "Eliza, I know my son, he was foolish in his youth. Cruel, even, I suspect. But this is bigger than teenage squabbles. This is livelihoods. Hundreds of employees and their families depend on Vance Industries. Can you, please, would you consider speaking to young Thorne? Use your connection? For Julian? For all of us?" The pressure was immense, suffocating. Eliza felt torn, pulled between a residual, illogical sense of obligation and a burning resentment. She owed the Vances nothing, especially not Julian, whose casual cruelty had carved deep wounds. Yet, she remembered Mrs. Vance's quiet kindnesses over the years, the way she'd always treated Eliza's mother with dignity, the small considerations that meant so much back then. And Arthur Vance, stripped of his arrogance, looked utterly broken, a desperate man clinging to any available wreckage. Could she refuse? Could she live with herself if her inaction contributed, even passively, to their complete ruin? The dilemma gnawed at her. Loyalty, however undeserved towards Julian, warred with self-preservation and a deep, visceral reluctance to approach the volatile, unpredictable Damian Thorne asking for such a monumental, impossible favor. What could she possibly offer him in return? What connection did Mr. Vance even imagine she had? After 2 days of agonizing indecision, sleepless nights spent staring at the ceiling, she found herself agreeing to try. Just to ask. The alternative, doing nothing while the family whose kindnesses, however small, had once been a lifeline, faced potential oblivion, felt unbearable. Damian summoned her, ostensibly for physics tutoring, a subject he excelled at effortlessly, naturally, to the Thorne estate, a sprawling, intimidating fortress nestled in the hills overlooking the city, a place reached via a winding private road, past watchful security and imposing wrought iron gates. Walking through the manicured grounds, past serene reflecting pools mirroring the perfect sky, and into the opulent, echoing marble halls, Eliza felt the chasm between their worlds widen into an unbridgeable gulf. She felt like an imposter, her simple clothes, clean, but chosen for durability, not style, and worn backpack stark against the backdrop of inherited power and unimaginable wealth. This wasn't just money, it was a different reality altogether. He was waiting for her in a vast, 2-story library, sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, the scent of old paper and expensive leather thick in the air. Damian looked infuriatingly relaxed, lounging in a deep leather armchair, one leg casually slung over the armrest, a complex physics equation, something far beyond their high school curriculum, scrawled elegantly on a nearby antique whiteboard. He'd had snacks laid out by unseen staff, delicate pastries and exotic fruits she couldn't name, and poured her iced water into a heavy crystal glass. He even made a self-deprecating joke about needing her help to remember basic Newtonian principles. For a moment, the sheer alienness of the setting and the tension eased. They worked through kinematics problems, his sharp mind cutting through complexities with an almost careless ease that both impressed and intimidated her. He explained concepts with a clarity their actual teacher lacked, occasionally pausing to gauge her understanding with those unervingly perceptive dark eyes. But the real reason for her visit sat like a stone in her stomach. As the session wound down, the sunlight outside beginning to take on a golden hue, she took a deep breath, her heart pounding against her ribs. "Damian," she began, her voice barely a whisper, hating the tremor she couldn't control. "There's something else. Something I need to ask you." He looked up from the textbook, his expression instantly wary, the lazy amusement vanishing from his eyes, replaced by that unnerving, intense focus. The air in the room shifted, became charged. "Something else?" he repeated softly, his gaze searching hers. Haltingly, awkwardly, stumbling over the words, she explained the Vance's plight, Arthur Vance's desperate plea, the potential collapse of Vance Industries. She tried to frame it carefully, avoiding mentioning Julian directly as the primary beneficiary, focusing instead on the abstract idea of the employees, the potential economic fallout for the community. She hated the words as they left her mouth, hated the false narrative, hated the feeling of begging, hated being reduced to a pawn in the Vance's desperate, high-stakes game. She felt cheapened, compromised. As she spoke, Damian's face grew colder, stonier with each word. He didn't interrupt, didn't fidget, just listened, his stillness more unnerving than any outburst could have been. His eyes never left hers, but they seemed to glaze over, building an invisible wall. When she finally finished, her voice trailing off miserably, the silence stretched, thick and glacial, broken only by the ticking of an unseen grandfather clock somewhere in the vast house. He slowly rose from his chair, the movement fluid and controlled, walked to the massive windows, and stood with his back to her, a silhouette against the blinding afternoon sun, looking out at the perfectly sculpted landscape that represented his world, ordered, controlled, untouched by the messy desperation she'd just brought into it. Finally, he spoke, his voice lethally quiet, stripped bare of any previous warmth or teasing inflection. Utterly devoid of any emotion she could recognize. "So, that's what this is about." He turned slowly, deliberately, his eyes like chips of black ice. "The first real thing you've ever asked of me, Reyes. The very first favor. And it's for him." The name hung in the air, unspoken but deafeningly loud. "Julian Vance. You come into my house, accept my help with physics, let me actually start thinking perhaps there was something interesting here." He trailed off, a muscle tightening almost imperceptibly in his jaw, the only outward sign of the internal fracture. And all along, it was just a prelude. An angle. It was always about Vance. "No, Damian, it's not like that." Eliza protested, desperate, needing him to understand the nuance, the obligation, the complexity. "It's complicated. His parents were kind to my mother worked for them for years, I felt I had to at least." He cut her off with a chillingly soft laugh that held no humor, only a deep, corrosive bitterness. "Complicated? No, Reyes, it's remarkably simple. You're transparent." He took a step towards her, invading her space, his presence suddenly overwhelming, charged with a cold fury that was more terrifying than his earlier outbursts. "Do you have any idea what Vance Industries is actually being investigated for? This isn't just bad luck or poor investments. We're talking potential fraud on a massive scale. Embezzlement. Serious economic crimes that could ruin thousands of ordinary investors. People could go to jail for a very long time. And you want the Thorne family," his voice dripped with contempt, "to intervene? To pull strings? To use our influence to potentially shield criminals, all because you still carry a pathetic schoolgirl torch for pretty boy Julian Vance? I don't." She cried again, tears stinging her eyes, stung by the injustice, the deliberate misunderstanding. I told you I was done with him. This isn't about him liking me, it's about. Did you? His voice was dangerously low, almost a caress, but laced with venom. Funny, that's not the impression I got. Your sketchbook told a different story, didn't it? Page after page. Obsession looks the same whether it's returned or not. And every interaction I've seen since, you still watch him, don't you? There's still that connection. He saw the flicker of truth in her eyes, not affection, but the lingering awareness, the shared history she couldn't erase, and twisted it into confirmation of his deepest cynicism. I thought maybe you were starting to see past the surface crap of this place. Maybe my defending you actually meant something. Seems I was spectacularly wrong. He stepped back abruptly, his expression shuddering completely, leaving behind only icy indifference. You can't forget him. Fine. Your choice. But don't you ever try to use me to save him again. We're done here, Reyes. Find your own way out. The rejection was absolute, brutal. Colder than Julian's dismissal by the fruit stall because this time, it felt like she'd personally shattered something fragile, something unexpectedly real that had hesitantly begun to form between them. The faint hope, the confusing spark of defiance and connection, utterly extinguished by the weight of his suspicion and her own compromised plea. He turned his back again, a final, unbridgeable dismissal. Eliza fled the library, the opulent house, the perfectly manicured grounds that suddenly felt like a gilded cage, tears finally blurring her vision. The misunderstanding was complete, solidified into a wall of ice between them, built on a foundation of mistrust and misinterpretation. Their paths diverged sharply, irrevocably after that final, disastrous encounter. Damian left for Stanford almost immediately after graduation, immersing himself in the demanding world of elite academia, later pivoting to the intense discipline of international sports, seemingly vanishing from her orbit. Eliza, accepted into the prestigious Eastwood University alongside, ironically, Julian, a constant, unwelcome reminder of the past, threw herself into her studies with a fierce, almost desperate determination. The pain of the double rejection, Julian's casual cruelty, Damian's icy condemnation, fueled a relentless drive for independence, for self-sufficiency. She would never be beholden to anyone's pity or protection again. She would build her own fortress, brick by painstaking brick. Their last interaction before parting for different coasts might have been at the chaotic 100-day graduation countdown party. He'd appeared unexpectedly, aloof as ever, flanked by a stunning girl Eliza didn't recognize. He'd looked straight through Eliza, who was on stage giving a student speech, as if she were a stranger. Later, he'd stopped her briefly near the school gates, mentioning Stanford. She'd offered a numb congratulations. He'd asked, a trace of something unreadable in his voice, if she was still set on Eastwood. She nodded. A flicker of self-deprecation crossed his face before he pulled on his helmet, straddled his motorbike, and disappeared with a roar, leaving only the scent of exhaust and shattered possibilities hanging in the air. The next 7 years unfolded like parallel narratives running on tracks destined never to cross, occasionally brushing against each other through news reports or social media whispers, but never truly connecting. Eliza Reyes underwent a profound metamorphosis. It wasn't just the physical changes, though those were undeniable. Time, diligent skincare, and perhaps a degree of distance from teenage angst finally cleared the stubborn acne. She discovered her own unique style, not chasing trends but cultivating an artistic, slightly edgy aesthetic that turned heads. She learned to manage her once unruly dark hair, often swept up in intricate styles or falling in deliberate waves. The glow-up, as her friends called it, was striking, but it radiated from within. The awkward, insecure teenager vanished, replaced by a young woman who carried herself with a quiet, unshakable confidence born of hard work and resilience. She didn't just survive Eastwood University, she conquered it. Her sharp intelligence, honed by years of quiet observation and relentless study, earned her top marks, followed by a coveted MBA from an equally prestigious institution. But academia wasn't her only pursuit. She rediscovered her passion for art, pouring her complex emotions onto large canvases filled with bold strokes, raw textures, and startling juxtapositions of color. What started as a private outlet gained momentum. Small gallery shows led to critical notice, collectors started paying attention, and soon, Eliza Reyes became a name whispered with respect in contemporary art circles. Simultaneously, the world of fashion came calling. Scouted on the street by an agent intrigued by her unconventional, striking looks, high cheekbones, intense dark eyes, a certain fierce grace, she hesitantly stepped onto the runway. Modeling felt like inhabiting another skin, a performance art where she could channel emotion through movement and stillness. Her intelligence and work ethic quickly set her apart from many other models. She wasn't just a pretty face, she was professional, perceptive, and utterly reliable. Soon, she was commanding attention on runways in New York, Paris, and Milan, her image gracing the pages of select high-fashion magazines. It wasn't about seeking validation, it was about the challenge, the creativity, and the undeniable thrill of financial independence. The first substantial paycheck, enough to move her parents out of the cramped apartment into a comfortable house in a quiet suburb, felt like true liberation. It severed the last ties to the old neighborhood and its constellation of painful high school memories. Friends she made in university and the art world, like the bubbly, insightful Mia Chen, found it impossible to believe Eliza had ever been the target of cruel jokes, let alone voted ugliest. "You?" Mia scoffed once over brunch, after Eliza alluded vaguely to a difficult past. "Eliza, darling, photographers literally chase you down the street for candid shots hoping for effortless chic. Your high school must have been populated by visually impaired aliens with appalling taste." Eliza just laughed, a genuine, free sound that felt years in the making, though the shadow of the memory remained. Damian Thorne, meanwhile, carved his own spectacular, yet solitary, trajectory across the global stage. After Stanford, where he graduated with effortless honors, he stunned the sporting world by dedicating himself to the intense discipline of competitive shooting. Few knew of his hidden talent, honed over years of solitary practice at the Thorne family's private ranges. At 18, barely out of university, he stood atop the Olympic podium in London, the gold medal heavy around his neck, the national anthem swelling for him. He became an instant national hero, the epitome of focused, disciplined excellence, a startling contrast to the rebellious, rule-breaking youth Eliza remembered. But that intense discipline seemed confined to the shooting range. His public life, glimpsed only through sporadic, cryptic posts on a closely followed but intensely private Instagram account managed by his team, was a whirlwind of adrenaline-fueled escapades across the globe. Stunning photos captured him free-diving into the sapphire depths of treacherous waters, scaling sheer, terrifying mountain faces with nonchalant grace, heli-skiing down untouched powder slopes in remote wildernesses, even base-jumping off vertiginous cliffs. He courted danger with an almost reckless abandon, surviving near-fatal accidents, a sudden storm during a wingsuit flight, an equipment malfunction on a deep dive, with little more than a shrug and a darkly humorous, minimalist caption. His feed was a curated collection of breathtaking landscapes and heart-stopping action. Conspicuously absent, however, was any hint of a romantic partner, any sign of personal connection beyond his loyal security team or fellow thrill-seekers. This calculated privacy only fueled his mystique, making him an object of intense fascination and speculation for millions. He remained an enigma, deliberately distant from his past, a solitary, restless figure chasing thrills at the edges of the world, perhaps trying to outrun something intangible. Eliza, through Mia's occasional excited updates, "OMG, look where Damian Thorne is now. What is he doing?" kept track of his trajectory from afar, a strange, unsettling mix of detached pride in his accomplishments and a persistent, wistful curiosity churning deep within her. She'd even held a ticket to a prestigious alumni seminar he gave at Eastwood once, stood outside the hall door listening to the murmur of the crowd inside, then turned away abruptly, unable to face the ghost of what might have been, terrified of the indifference or, worse, the lingering coldness she might find in his eyes. And Julian Vance? His narrative ran parallel, a constant low hum beneath the surface of Eliza's rising success. Vance Industries, perhaps aided by powerful connections Damian Thorne unknowingly preserved by not actively seeking their complete destruction back then during the height of the crisis, somehow managed to weather the storm. Arthur Vance stepped back, and Julian, armed with his Eastwood degree, stepped smoothly into his father's shoes, proving himself a capable, driven, and ambitious leader. He radiated success, rebuilding the family name and fortune with impressive speed. But the regret he'd confessed to on television years later clearly festered long before that public admission. It manifested as a relentless, almost obsessive pursuit of Eliza. Throughout their shared years at Eastwood, and increasingly in the years that followed as her own star began to rise, he was a constant presence at the edge of her life. Exquisite, expensive gifts, jewelry she never wore, artworks that didn't fit her aesthetic, arrived unannounced at her studio. Invitations to the most exclusive galas, charity balls, and industry events filled her inbox, always with a personalized note from him. He materialized at her gallery openings, his expression a careful blend of admiration and longing. He'd appear at industry parties she attended, maneuvering through the crowds to coincidentally bump into her. He even took up jogging in the specific park near her downtown loft, ensuring accidental encounters. His apologies were frequent, almost rehearsed, laced with earnest self-flagellation. "I was an idiot, Eliza," he'd say, his handsome face etched with practiced sincerity, catching her arm lightly after a lecture they both attended. "Young, stupid, arrogant, and so damn jealous whenever I saw you even talking to Thorne back then, it drove me insane. I see that now. I acted badly. Terribly. Can you ever forgive me? Is there any chance, could you give us, another chance?" Worse, perhaps, was the subtle manipulation he seemed to engage in online, likely through private social media channels accessible to their overlapping university and, later, professional circles. Mia occasionally forwarded Eliza screenshots from mutual acquaintances, a photo Julian posted from a large alumni gathering, artfully cropped to show just him and Eliza in close proximity, caption, "Great catching up with brilliant minds." Another time, a vague post about enjoying a specific city view, posted shortly after Eliza had mentioned attending a conference there, caption, "Sometimes the best moments are unexpected." Nothing overt, nothing provable, but enough to create a misleading narrative of continued closeness, of shared moments, an illusion that might look convincing to anyone unaware of the truth, perhaps even to someone like Damian, should such curated glimpses ever cross his path through the digital grapevine. It felt like an attempt to claim a connection by association, a possessiveness that grated on Eliza's hard-won independence. Eliza learned to handle him with polite, unwavering, impenetrable distance. She accepted his apologies for the past, acknowledging his youth and foolishness, forgiving the specific act of cruelty, felt like a necessary step in releasing her own lingering bitterness. It was for her own peace of mind, not his absolution. But she drew a firm, unyielding line against anything more. "Julian, I appreciate the sentiment, truly," she told him coolly one evening, cutting off another lengthy, impassioned explanation of his past jealousy after he sent an extravagant bouquet to her studio. But that was high school. A very long time ago. We're different people leading very different lives now. Please, don't make yourself emotional over something that simply isn't there anymore. It's not fair to either of us. There would be no second chance. Not now, not ever." The feelings she'd once nurtured, that fragile adolescent crush, were long dead, buried under the cold, hard weight of his betrayal and solidified by the strength she'd found within herself. She was building her own life, her own success, her own happiness, on her own terms. Independence was her shield, resilience her foundation. Love, for now, was a distant, unexplored territory, a complication she had neither the time nor the inclination to entertain. Mia sometimes teased her, frustrated by Eliza's apparent immunity to the advances of the many attractive, successful men who now orbited her world. Okay, so Vance's ancient history, persona non grata, got it. But seriously, Eliza, all these incredible guys practically throwing themselves at you, artists, collectors, even that charming architect, and you're just not interested? Was there someone else back then? Before Vance turned into a stalker light? Someone so amazing, so unforgettable, that he ruined you for everyone else? A fleeting, unwelcome image of Damian Thorne's intense, unreadable gaze, his unexpected, violent defense in the classroom, the confusing, almost painful spark that had existed between them before it was so brutally extinguished in that cold library, it would sometimes flash through Eliza's mind. An old ache, faint but persistent. She'd quickly push it away, locking it back down. No, she'd lie smoothly, forcing a dismissive smile. "Just focused on my work, Mia. No time for distractions." And so, 7 years spun by, marked by silence, separate assents, and deeply entrenched, unresolved misunderstandings. Eliza built her empire of art and independence, her name synonymous with striking creativity and quiet strength. Damian chased danger and gold medals across the globe, wrapped in enigma and speculation. Julian nursed his regret and pursued a ghost, mistaking forgiveness for opportunity. They were planets in vastly different orbits, each shaped by the gravitational pull of their shared, painful history. Yet, the universe has a strange sense of symmetry. Their worlds, once separated by class and circumstance, now moved in parallel orbits at the highest levels of international art, fashion, and finance. A collision, a reckoning, felt almost inevitable. The dormant forces were stirring, waiting for the right catalyst, the right moment, the right chance encounter to draw them inexorably back together. Milan rendezvous, unraveling truths. Their worlds, once so different, now moved in parallel orbits at the highest levels of art, fashion, and finance. A collision felt almost inevitable. The universe, it seemed, had chosen Milan during the glittering chaos of Fashion Week as its stage. Eliza Reyes felt the familiar pre-show buzz backstage at the exclusive Prada presentation, a chaotic symphony of hurried Italian, the hiss of hairspray, and the frantic energy of dressers. She stood tall, a striking figure amidst the flutter of silks and sequins, her professional calm a practiced shield. Yet, beneath the surface, an unfamiliar tremor persisted. She'd seen the finalized, ultra-exclusive guest list earlier. Thorne Consortium. And beside it, Damian Thorne. 7 years. 7 years of silence, of carefully constructed distance, and now he would be out there, just meters away, watching her. Would he even recognize her? Or would he look straight through her, the way he had at that graduation party? She pushed the thought away, focusing on the familiar rhythm of deep breaths, channeling the nervous energy into the quiet intensity her runway presence was known for. This was work. This was her domain now. He was irrelevant. Wasn't he? The lights hit her as she stepped onto the runway. The cavernous, minimalist space pulsed with energy, the air thick with anticipation and expensive perfume. Hundreds of faces blurred in the periphery, critics, buyers, influencers, celebrities. Her stride was confident, showcasing the sharp lines of the avant-garde coat she wore, her expression conveying the cool, intellectual power of the collection. She moved through the prescribed path, hitting her marks, her mind a practiced blank, focusing only on movement, on presence. Until her gaze swept the front row. And landed on him. Damian Thorne. He was older, yes, the sharp edges of youth replaced by the formidable presence of a man comfortable with immense power. His dark hair was impeccably styled, his bespoke suit exuded understated luxury, but it was his eyes, intense, unnervingly focused, that held her captive for a split second. They hadn't changed. Still the same dark depths that could be lazily amused one moment, bitingly cold the next. And he wasn't alone. Beside him sat a woman of breathtaking, classic beauty, blonde, poised, exuding an effortless European elegance that made her instantly recognizable as Isabelle Moreau, philanthropist heiress and darling of the continental social circuit. As Eliza watched, frozen for a microsecond that felt like an eternity, Damian leaned towards Isabelle, murmuring something that made her laugh, her perfectly sculpted lips curving in a smile of easy intimacy. He returned the smile, a faint, almost imperceptible softening around his eyes as he lightly touched Isabelle's arm. A perfect match. A handsome man and a beautiful woman, sharing a private moment under the scrutiny of the fashion world. They looked right together. Pain, sharp and unexpected, lanced through Eliza. 7 years of building her fortress, 7 years of telling herself she was over the confusion and hurt of the past, 7 years of cultivating indifference, all crumbled in that single instant. It wasn't jealousy, not exactly. It was the sudden, brutal confirmation of the chasm between their worlds, the visual proof that he had moved on, belonged in this sphere of effortless glamour and inherited grace, while she was still the girl from the wrong side of the tracks, playing dress-up on their stage. The thought was irrational, unfair to her own hard-won success, but the old wound, the deep-seated insecurity Julian Vance had so cruelly exploited, tore open. A single, hot tear escaped, tracing a path down her cheek before she could stop it. Mortified, she completed her turn at the end of the runway, her head held high, but her eyes, caught in the flashbulbs of the photographer's pit, reflected a universe of heartbreak. That fleeting moment of vulnerability, that single tear against her otherwise composed expression, was captured, magnified, and instantly transmitted to the digital world. Backstage, the air crackled. Her agent rushed over, eyes wide. Eliza! What was that? Genius! Absolute genius! Eliza stared, bewildered. What are you talking about? The tear. The turn. Everyone's talking. It fit the collection's theme, metamorphosis, the beauty in brokenness, perfectly. Mayuchia herself looked thrilled. You sold it, darling. You absolutely sold it. Before Eliza could process the absurdity, her phone began buzzing relentlessly. Nia Chen was already sending frantic messages with links. Bloggers were live tweeting, fashion critics were dissecting the performance. Within minutes, the clip went viral. Hashtag Proditeer was trending. Slow-motion GIFs analyzed her micro-expressions. Fashion commentators lauded her unflinching portrayal of transformation, her vivid depiction of the journey from freedom to vibration to brokenness and finally healing and rebirth. They called it professional, masterful, a new benchmark in runway storytelling. No one, it seemed, considered the possibility that the tear might have been real. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. Her moment of genuine, private pain, witnessed by the man indirectly responsible for so much of it, was being celebrated as her greatest professional triumph. The official after-party was held in a centuries-old palazzo, transformed into a dazzling landscape of champagne fountains, avant-garde floral